My brother decided to turn my recent, painful divorce into the punchline of his Christmas toast, mocking my single status to amuse our family. So, I calmly silenced the room by revealing that his happy wife had just asked me for my divorce lawyer's number. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The air inside my parents' house was always stifling, but this Christmas, it felt heavy enough to crush my lungs. I stood in the entryway, shaking the snow off my coat, and took a deep, steadying breath. It had been exactly 3 months since the papers were signed. 3 months since my life, as I knew it, had dissolved into a series of legal meetings, cardboard boxes, and lonely nights in a rental apartment that smelled faintly of someone else's lemon polish. I was the divorced daughter now. I could feel the title hanging over me like a neon sign as I walked into the living room. My mother, Megan, was the first to spot me. She didn't hug me. Instead, she offered a tight, pitying smile and a quick scan of my outfit, as if checking to see if my heartbreak was visible on my hemline. "Evelyn," she said, her voice dropping an octave, the way one speaks at a funeral. "You made it. We weren't sure if you'd be up for all this." She gestured vaguely to the garland-draped room, filled with the noise of my cousins and the clinking of crystal. "I'm fine, Mom," I lied, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Merry Christmas." My father, Simon, gave me a stiff pat on the back, handing me a glass of wine a little too quickly. "Good to see you, Evie. Keep your chin up, eh?" But the real tension didn't arrive until my brother, Mark, walked in. Mark, the golden child. Mark, the wealthy investment banker with the perfect teeth, the perfect car, and the ostensibly perfect marriage. He strode into the room with the confidence of a man who had never been told no in his life. Trailing behind him was Sarah, his wife. Sarah looked brittle. That was the only word for it. She was beautiful, dressed in immaculate green velvet, but her eyes were darting around the room nervously, and her skin had a pallor that makeup couldn't quite hide. When she saw me, her eyes widened just a fraction, a silent communication passing between us that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Evelyn," Mark boomed, his voice cutting through the chatter. He didn't come over to hug me. He stayed by the fireplace, one arm draped possessively over the mantel. "Brave of you to show your face. I told Mom you'd probably be hiding under the covers till New Year's." "Hello, Mark," I said, keeping my voice even. I took a sip of wine, the acidic taste burning my throat. "I'm just here for dinner." Right, he chuckled, winking at our cousin. "Single life treating you well, you look tired." I ignored him. I was used to this. Mark had spent our entire lives stepping on me to make himself look taller. But tonight felt different. There was a malice in the air, a sharpness to his grin that set my teeth on edge. I tried to focus on Sarah, offering her a warm nod, but she was staring intently at the floor, twisting her wedding ring round and round her finger. Dinner was an exercise in torture. We sat at the long mahogany table, the centerpiece a sprawling arrangement of holly and expensive candles. I was seated, intentionally, I suspected, at the far end, opposite Mark and Sarah. My mother fussed over the turkey, my father talked about golf, and I focused on cutting my food into microscopic pieces so I wouldn't have to speak. Then came the tapping of the spoon against the glass. The room quieted. Mark stood up, holding his champagne flute aloft. He looked around the table, basking in the attention. He loved an audience. "I'd like to propose a toast," Mark announced, his chest puffed out. "To family, to success, to another year of crushing it at the firm." There were polite murmurs of "here, here." Mark's gaze drifted down the table and landed on me. His smile twisted into something cruel. "And, of course, a special toast to my little sister, Evelyn." My stomach dropped. I gripped my fork, my knuckles turning white. "Here's to Evelyn," he continued, his voice dripping with mock sympathy that was loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Officially back on the market, single and desperate." The table erupted in laughter. My cousins, my aunts, even my father let out a chuckle. It was a humiliating, isolating sound. Mark was grinning, raising his glass higher. "Don't worry, Evie. Maybe next year you'll find someone who can actually stand you." The heat rushed to my face, not from embarrassment, but from a sudden, molten rage. I looked at my mother. She was sipping her wine, averting her eyes. No one was going to defend me. No one ever did. I look. Ed at Sarah. She wasn't laughing. She was staring at Mark with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. And just like that, the fear evaporated. I didn't care about the holiday. I didn't care about keeping the peace. I set my glass down on the table with a deliberate, heavy clack that cut through the laughter. The room went silent, waiting for my reaction. They expected tears. They expected me to run away. I looked Mark dead in the eye. I didn't blink. "That's funny," I said, my voice steady and cold as ice. Coming from someone whose wife just asked me last week if our lawyer was any good. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. It sucked the air right out of the room. The only sound was the crackle of the fireplace and the sudden, sharp intake of breath from my mother. Mark's grin froze. It didn't fade naturally, it just stuck there, a grotesque mask of joviality that no longer matched his eyes. His face went white, the blood draining away so fast he looked like he might faint. He lowered his glass slowly, his eyes flicking from me to Sarah. "What?" he whispered. It wasn't a question, it was a plea for me to say I was joking. I didn't back down. I picked up my fork and calmly speared a piece of roasted potato. "You heard me, Mark. Sarah asked for my divorce lawyer's contact info last Tuesday at the coffee shop on 4th. She specifically asked if he was ruthless." All eyes turned to Sarah. She didn't shrink away. For the first time all night, she sat up straight. She looked at Mark, and then she looked at the stunned faces of my parents. She didn't say a word. She simply placed her napkin on the table, pushed her chair back, and stood up. "Sarah," Mark's voice cracked. "Sarah, what is she talking about? Tell her she's crazy." Sarah looked down at him, her expression unreadable. "I think I'm going to go," she said softly. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just turned and walked out of the dining room. "Sarah," Mark shouted, scrambling out of his chair, knocking his wine glass over. Red wine soaked into the pristine white tablecloth, spreading like a fresh wound. "Get back here." We heard the front door open and slam shut. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. "Evelyn," my mother shrieked, finally finding her voice. She stood up, her face flushed with panic. "What have you done? Why would you say something like that? You've ruined Christmas." "I ruined Christmas?" I asked, incredulous. "Mark just humiliated me in front of the entire family, and I'm the villain for telling the truth." "It was a joke," my father bellowed, slamming his hand on the table. "Can't you take a joke? You had to go and make up lies about your brother's marriage." "It's not a lie," I said, my voice rising. "Go ask her. Oh wait, she just left because she couldn't stand to look at him anymore." Mark was standing by the doorway, looking torn between chasing his wife and strangling me. He chose me. He marched back to the table, leaning over me, his face inches from mine. Veins were bulging in his neck. "You jealous little witch," he hissed. "You're so miserable that you want to drag everyone down with you. Sarah is happy. We are happy. You're lying." "Am I?" I challenged him. "Check your bank accounts, Mark. Check the joint savings." His eyes widened. That hit a nerve. "You don't know anything," he spat, though his confidence was clearly wavering. "I know enough," I replied quietly, "and I know what she gave me." That was the line that stopped him cold. What she gave me. He froze, his mind clearly racing, trying to calculate what Sarah might have had access to, what she might have passed on to me during that coffee date. He didn't know for sure, but the fear in his eyes told me everything. He had secrets, big ones, and he was terrified they were currently sitting in my purse. "Get out," Mark whispered. "Get out of this house." "Mark, you can't kick your sister out," my mother pleaded, though she was looking at me with disdain. "Evelyn, just apologize, say you were drunk. Fix this." I looked at my mother. a woman who had spent 30 years smoothing over the cracks in the wall rather than fixing the foundation. She would rather I lie and accept the abuse than admit her golden boy was flawed. "No," I said, standing up. My legs felt shaky, but I held my ground. "I'm not apologizing, and I'm certainly not staying." I grabbed my purse. As I walked past Mark, I leaned in close, dropping my voice so only he could hear. "She knows about the apartment, Mark, and she knows who Elise is." Mark flinched as if I'd slapped him. He didn't say another word. He just stood there, paralyzed, watching me walk away. I left the dining room, the silence heavy and suffocating behind me. As I stepped out into the cold night air, my heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I reached into my coat pocket and wrapped my fingers around the cold, hard plastic of the flash drive Sarah had pressed into my hand 3 days ago. Mark thought this was just a bad dinner. He had no idea that the war had actually started days ago, and he was already losing. To understand why that moment at the dinner table was so explosive, you have to understand the dynamic of the family I grew up in. In the house of Simon and Megan, Mark was the sun, and the rest of us were just planets lucky enough to orbit him. From the time we were kids, Mark could do no wrong. If he broke a vase, it was because the vase was placed precariously. If I broke a vase, I was clumsy and careless. This dynamic calcified as we got older. Mark went into finance, became a high-powered consultant, and started making obscene amounts of money. He bought the big house, drove the luxury sedans, and married the beautiful wife. He was the tangible proof of my parents' successful parenting. I, on the other hand, was the event planner. Successful in my own right, yes, I ran my own company, coordinated massive corporate galas, and managed 6-figure budgets. But to my parents, it was party planning. It wasn't serious. And when my husband, a man they had never really liked, cheated on me and left, it was the final nail in the coffin of my credibility. I was the mess. Mark was the masterpiece. But Mark's masterpiece was painted on a rotting canvas. I had always known Mark was arrogant. He was the kind of man who snapped his fingers at waiters and parked in handicapped spots because he would only be a minute. But in recent years, his behavior had darkened. He became secretive, possessive, and increasingly cruel to Sarah. Sarah was a sweet, soft-spoken woman who had given up her career in graphic design to support Mark's climb up the corporate ladder. Over the last year, I had watched her fade. She lost weight. She stopped laughing. She started flinching when he moved too quickly. The turning point came last week. I was sitting in a coffee shop, reviewing venue contracts when Sarah walked in. She wasn't supposed to be there. Mark kept her on a tight schedule. She was wearing sunglasses, even though it was overcast. When she sat down opposite me, she took them off, revealing red, puffy eyes. "Evelyn," she had whispered, her hands trembling around her coffee cup. "I can't do it anymore." "What happened?" I asked, closing my laptop. He's moving money," she said, her voice barely audible. "I found statements, offshore accounts. And there's a woman, Elise, he thinks I'm stupid, Evie. He thinks I just sit at home and stare at the wall." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small black flash drive. I copied everything I could find on his laptop while he was in the shower. I don't know what half of it means, but I know it looks illegal. She pushed the drive across the table to me. "He told me yesterday that if I ever tried to leave him, he'd bury me. He said he'd make sure I ended up with nothing, living in a gutter. He said he has the best lawyers in the city." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "Is your lawyer good, the one who handled your divorce? Because I don't just want to leave him, Evelyn, I want to survive him." That was the moment everything shifted. Looking at Sarah, terrified and broken by my own brother, I realized that my loyalty to family had been misplaced for decades. Mark wasn't just a jerk, he was a monster. He was financially abusing his wife and threatening her with ruin, all while playing the role of the benevolent patriarch at Sunday dinners. I took the flash drive. "My lawyer is a shark," I told her, "and we are going to take him for everything he's worth." Back in the present, driving away from my parents' house, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Mark was going to come after me. He was going to come after Sarah. He had money, he had influence, and he had the blind support of our parents. But he had made a fatal error. He thought I was weak. He thought I was just the single, desperate little sister who could be mocked into submission. He didn't realize that in my line of work, I dealt with logistics, crisis management, and disaster control every single day. I knew how to organize chaos. And I was about to organize the complete dismantling of his life. I didn't go home immediately. My instincts as an event planner kicked in. When the venue is on fire, you don't run into the flames, you secure the perimeter. I drove to my office, a converted industrial loft downtown that felt more like a fortress than my empty apartment. It was 11:00 p.m. on Christmas night. The city was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos unraveling in my mind. I locked the door behind me, the heavy deadbolt sliding into place with a reassuring thud. I made myself a cup of black coffee, my hands shaking so badly I spilled grounds on the counter. I took a moment to breathe, forcing the tremors to stop. Then I sat at my main desk, pulled the flash drive from my pocket, and jet it into my secure work computer. The folder structure was chaotic, a digital reflection of Mark's arrogance. He hadn't even bothered to encrypt most of it. He truly believed Sarah was too simple to understand what she was looking at, and that no one else would ever see it. I clicked on a folder labeled Consulting 2024. Spreadsheets filled the screen. At first glance, it looked like standard financial jargon, client retainers, market adjustments, fee structures. But I managed budgets for million-dollar galas. I knew how to spot a padded invoice. "Okay, Mark," I whispered to the empty room. "Let's see where the money is going." It didn't take long. There was a recurring monthly payment of $8,500 going to a company called Lumina Aesthetics LLC. I cross-referenced the address. It wasn't a consulting firm. It was a high-end apartment complex in the city's most expensive district. The tenant listed on the lease, which Mark had foolishly saved as a PDF in a subfolder, was Elise Vane. I felt a wave of nausea. He wasn't just cheating, he was bankrolling a second life using marital funds. But as I dug deeper, the nausea turned into cold shock. The money flowing into Lumina wasn't coming from his salary. It was coming from an account labeled S&M Trust. My heart hammered against my ribs. S&M, Simon and Megan, my parents. Mark wasn't just hiding money from Sarah. He was skimming from the family trust, the retirement nest egg my father had built over 40 years of manufacturing work. He was stealing from the very people who worshipped him to pay for his mistress's apartment. My phone buzzed, startling me. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello." "Evie," the voice was small, fractured. "It's Sarah." "Sarah, where are you?" I demanded, grabbing a notepad. "Are you safe?" "I'm at a motel off the interstate," she sobbed. "I didn't know where to go. He's texting me. He says if I don't come home and bring the drive, he's going to report the car stolen. He says he'll have me arrested." "Listen to me closely," I said, my voice dropping into my professional crisis mode. "Do not answer him. Do not go back to that house. I am coming to get you right now. You are not staying at a motel. You're coming to my place. We are going to call Mr. Henderson first thing in the morning." "He's going to destroy us, Evie," she whispered. "No," I said, looking at the spreadsheet where Mark had transferred $50,000 of my father's money into a shell account. "He thinks he is, but he just handed us the match to burn his whole kingdom down." I spent the next 40 minutes driving like a stunt driver to get to her. When I found her, she was shivering in the lobby of a rundown motel, clutching a small overnight bag. She looked like a ghost of the woman she used to be. I ushered her into my car, cranked up the heat, and drove us back to my apartment. We didn't sleep. We sat on my living room floor with the printed bank statements spread out like a war map. By 4:00 a.m., the picture was clear. Mark was leveraged to the hilt. He had bad investments he was covering up with fresh injections of stolen cash. He was a Ponzi scheme of one man. He called me stupid last week, Sarah said, tracing a line on a statement with her finger. He said I wouldn't understand high finance. He relied on that, I said. He relied on everyone trusting the golden boy without question. He never thought the two women he disrespected the most would actually compare notes. When the sun came up, I called Arthur Henderson. He was the divorce lawyer who had handled my split, a man with a reputation for being expensive and utterly heartless. "Evelyn," he rasped, his voice gravelly with sleep. "It's 6:00 a.m. on Boxing Day. You better have a dead body or a winning lottery ticket." "Better," I said. "I have proof of fraud, embezzlement, and a breach of fiduciary duty involving a family trust. And I have the scorned wife willing to testify." There was a pause on the line. Then I heard the rustle of sheets and the click of a lamp turning on. "I'll be at the office in an hour," Henderson said. "Bring everything." The confrontation didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened in my sanctuary. 2 days after Christmas, I was at my office, coordinating with a vendor for a New Year's Eve charity ball. Sarah was in the back room, meeting with Henderson's paralegal to sign affidavits. The front door chimed, and I looked up, expecting the caterer. It was Mark. He looked terrible. His skin was gray, his eyes bloodshot, and his usually immaculate suit was rumpled. He didn't look like the master of the universe anymore. He looked like a cornered animal. He strode past my receptionist, ignoring her protests, and kicked open the door to my private office. "Where is she?" he barked, not bothering with pleasantries. I didn't stand up. I stayed seated behind my large, oak desk, keeping a barrier between us. "Hello, Mark, you look like you-ha." Event slept. "Don't play games with me, Evelyn." He slammed his hands on my desk, leaning over me. "I know Sarah is with you. I know you have my property. Give me the drive, tell me where my wife is, and I might act like a brother and not press charges for theft." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Theft, that's rich. Is that what you're calling it?" "It's corporate data," he hissed. "Confidential client information. You are in possession of stolen trade secrets. I can have you buried in lawsuits so deep you won't see the sun for a decade." "I don't care about your clients, Mark," I said, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms. "I care about Lumina Aesthetics. I care about the recurring payments to the Diamond District jewelers that certainly didn't result in gifts for Sarah." Mark flinched. His mouth opened, then closed. He pulled back slightly. You looked at the files." "Every single one," I confirmed. "And I have to say, for a financial genius, you are incredibly sloppy. You really thought listing Elise as a consultant would bypass an audit." His face twisted into a sneer. "It's complicated. You don't understand how business works. That's why your little party planning business is cute and I run a firm." "Does business usually involve draining mom and dad's trust fund?" The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Mark's arrogance evaporated instantly, replaced by sheer, unadulterated panic. He looked at the door, then back at me, lowering his voice to a desperate whisper. "You didn't. You haven't told them." "Not yet," I lied. I wanted him to sweat. "But I'm curious, Mark. How were you planning to pay that back? Or were you just waiting for them to die so the accounts would close and no one would notice the missing $300,000? He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the small room. "It's a bridge loan. I had a liquidity issue. I'm putting it back next month. The bonus check is coming in January. It's all going back." "You and I both know that's a lie," I said calmly. "I saw your credit card debt. You're drowning, Mark. You're robbing Peter to pay Elise." He stopped pacing and looked at me with a look I had never seen before. It wasn't anger. It was calculation. He was assessing me as a threat for the first time in his life. "How much do you want?" he asked. I blinked. "Excuse me." "Money," he said, pulling out his checkbook. "You're divorced. You're struggling. I know the rent on this place isn't cheap. How much to give me the drive and convince Sarah to come home? 10,000? 20. I stared at him, feeling a profound sense of pity mixed with disgust. He really thought everyone was as hollow as he was. I don't want your money, Mark, I said, standing up. I want you to leave, now. If you blow this up, he stepped closer, his voice turning menacing again, you kill Mom and Dad. You know that, right? Dad's heart isn't strong. If he finds out I borrowed that money, it could kill him. Do you want that on your conscience? Being the daughter who killed her father just to get back at her brother. It was a masterstroke of manipulation. He knew exactly where to hit. He was using our parents as human shields. Get out, I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. Think about it, Evie, he sneered, buttoning his jacket, regaining some of his composure now that he thought he had found my weak spot. You tell them you break their hearts. You keep quiet, Sarah comes home, and everyone stays happy. Don't be the villain, again. He turned and walked out, leaving the door swinging in his wake. I sank back into my chair, my heart pounding. He was right about one thing, telling my parents would devastate them, but he was wrong about the outcome. He wasn't protecting them, he was bleeding them dry. The back door opened and Sarah stepped out. She had heard everything. Her face was pale, but her eyes were dry. He tried to buy you, she said, her voice hard. He tried to buy silence, I corrected. We can't let him get away with it, Evie, Sarah said, walking over to the window and watching Mark get into his Porsche. He's not going to put that money back. He's going to take the rest. I know, I said, reaching for the phone to call Henderson back. That's why we're accelerating the timeline. Mark didn't wait for my decision. He went on the offensive immediately. 2 hours after he left my office, my phone rang. It was my mother. Evelyn, she didn't say hello. Her voice was shrill, trembling with indignation. Mark just left here. He is distraught, absolutely distraught. Mom, listen. No, you listen, she snapped. He told us everything. He told us that you and Sarah have been conspiring against him. He told us about your episode. My episode, I repeated, confused. He said you're having a breakdown because of the divorce, she continued. He said you're projecting your anger onto his marriage, and he said you stole his work laptop and are threatening to leak client data unless he gives you money. Evelyn, tell me it's not true. Tell me you aren't blackmailing your own brother. I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. He had spun the narrative so fast, flipping the victim and the villain. He had confessed to a conflict, but painted himself as the martyr. Mom, Mark is lying, I said firmly. He is manipulating you. Mark has never lied to us, she shouted. He has taken care of us. He manages our finances. He pays for the vacations. And you've always been jealous of him. I can't believe you would stoop this low. He manages your finances, I asked, seizing on the point. Mom, have you looked at your trust statement lately? Of course not, Mark handles it, she dismissed me. He said you might say something crazy like that. He said you'd try to confuse us with numbers. Evelyn, if you don't return his property and stop filling Sarah's head with these paranoid delusions, your father and I, we will have to cut you off. Completely. No contact. The line went dead. I stared at the phone. He had isolated me. He had turned my own parents into his weapon. It hurt, a sharp, deep ache in my chest, but it also clarified everything. There was no going back now. There was no soft way to do this. They believe him, Sarah asked from the doorway. She was holding a cup of tea, her knuckles white. Hook, line, and sinker, I said. He told them I'm blackmailing him. They threatened to disown me. Sarah set the tea down. He cut my cards, she said. I went to buy toothpaste at the pharmacy down the street. Declined. He emptied the joint checking account too. I checked the app. Balance is 0. He's squeezing us, I said, turning back to my computer. He wants to starve us out. It gets worse, Sarah said, pulling a piece of paper from her pocket. I got an email notification on my old phone. He's trying to liquidate the portfolio. The big one, the one with your parents' stocks. I grabbed the paper. It was a trade confirmation request. Mark was trying to cash out the remaining equity in the family trust. He was planning to run, or at least hide the money where no court could touch it. He's panicking, I realized. He knows we have the evidence, so he's trying to scorch the earth before we can use it. I dialed Henderson. Arthur, we need an emergency injunction. He's liquidating assets, and he's trying to clean out my parents' trust. I'm already on it. Henderson's voice was calm, a soothing balm to my anxiety. I just got off the phone with a forensic accountant. The paper trail is undeniable, Evelyn. We have enough for a freeze order. But the courts are slow during the holiday week. We might not get a judge until January 2nd. That's too late, I said. He'll have moved the money to the Caymans by then. Then you need to stop him socially before we stop him legally, Henderson said. You need to force his hand. Is there an opportunity, a place where he can't run, where he has to answer for himself? I looked at the calendar on my wall, December 31st. My parents were hosting their annual New Year's Eve gala. It was a pretentious, black-tie affair at their country club. All of Mark's clients would be there. His boss would be there. My parents' friends, the people whose opinions mattered more to them than oxygen, would be there. Mark would be there, playing the grieving husband whose wife had lost her way, probably spinning his tale of the crazy sister to anyone who would listen. Yes, I said, a plan forming in my mind. There is an opportunity. I turned to Sarah. Mom and Dad threatened to cut me off. They think I'm the villain. Mark thinks he's won the narrative. So what do we do? Sarah asked. We go to the party, I said. We don't hide, we don't apologize. We go there and we bring the receipts. They'll throw us out, Sarah said, fear flickering in her eyes. Not when they see what we have, I replied. I need you to be brave, Sarah. I need you to stand next to me. Can you do that? Sarah looked at the empty bank notification on her phone, then at me. The fear in her eyes hardened into something brittle and sharp. He left me with $0, Evie. He told your parents I was crazy. He has taken everything from me. She looked up, and for the first time, she looked like a force to be reckoned with. I'll wear the red dress, she said. I smiled. It was the dress Mark had always told her was too much. Perfect, I said. I'll call the printer. We need to blow up some of these documents to poster size. Mark wanted a show. I was an event planner. I was going to give him a show he would never forget. The country club ballroom was a cavern of crystal chandeliers, gold leaf, and the suffocating scent of expensive perfume. It was the kind of place where silence was enforced by social pressure, and laughter was measured in decibels. My parents, Simon and Megan, were holding court near the ice sculpture, accepting compliments on their year, on their health, and, inevitably, on their son. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, Sarah beside me. Sarah looked breathtaking. The red dress was a vibrant slash of crimson against the sea of black tuxedos and beige evening gowns. She wasn't the trembling woman I had pulled from a motel lobby 2 nights ago. She was a statue of resolve. I wore a sharp, tailored black jumpsuit, my work armor. I carried a sleek leather portfolio, not a purse. Ready, I whispered. Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Mark. He was laughing at something his boss, the CEO of his firm, was saying. I'm ready. We descended the stairs. The murmur of the crowd shifted as we reached the floor. People noticed Sarah first. They noticed the dress, then the fact that she was walking with me, the black sheep, instead of standing by her husband. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the room like a breeze through dry grass. Mark saw us when we were 20 feet away. The glass of champagne in his hand didn't break, but his grip tightened so hard I saw his knuckles turn white from across the room. He excused himself from his boss and intercepted us before we could reach our parents. What are you doing here? He hissed, stepping into our path. His smile was plastered on, a grimace for the benefit of the onlookers, but his eyes were murderous. I told you, if you came here, I'd have security drag you out. Merry Christmas, Mark, I said, my voice loud enough to carry to the nearby tables. We just wanted to wish Mom and Dad a Happy New Year. Get out, he snarled, dropping the pretensive volume. Now, before I embarrass you both. Is there a problem here? My father, Simon, appeared at Mark's elbow. He looked at me with deep disappointment. Evelyn, We told you not to come if you were going to cause a scene." "I'm not here to cause a scene, Dad," I said calmly. "I'm here to save your retirement." "Don't listen to her," Mark interrupted quickly, grabbing my father's arm. "She's having an episode. She's drunk. Security." He waved a hand toward the entrance. But it was too late. The commotion had drawn a crowd. Mark's boss, a tall, imposing man named Mr. Sterling, drifted over, curious about the disruption involving his star consultant. "Mark," Sterling asked, "is everything all right?" "Fine, sir, just a family misunderstanding." Mark laughed nervously, sweat beading on his forehead. "My sister is unwell." "I'm perfectly well, Mr. Sterling," I said, stepping around Mark. "But your firm might not be if you don't audit Mark's accounts on Tuesday." The air left the immediate vicinity. The band seemed to fade into the background. "Evelyn, stop this insanity." My mother, Megan, pushed through the crowd, her face flushed. "You are ruining the evening. Mark is a good man. He takes care of us." "Does he?" Sarah spoke up. Her voice was clear, ringing like a bell. "Mark, tell them about the bridge loan." Mark lunged for Sarah, grabbing her wrist. "Shut up, Sarah, you're coming home." "Let her go," I shouted, shoving Mark back. The physical altercation caused a gasp to ripple through the ballroom. The music actually stopped this time. We were now the center of attention for 300 of the city's elite. I didn't waste the silence. I opened my leather portfolio and pulled out the enlarged, mounted documents I had prepared. I didn't need a projector. The bold red ink on the blown-up bank statements was visible to everyone in our circle. "Mom, Dad," I said, holding up the first chart. "This is the transaction history of the S&M Family Trust for the last 6 months. Mark has been the trustee, correct?" "Put that away," Mark screamed, lunging for the board, but his boss, Mr. Sterling, stepped in his way. "Let her speak, Mark," Sterling said, his voice cold. He looked at the chart. "That's a wire transfer to an offshore shell." "It's an investment strategy," Mark yelled, his voice cracking. "It's high yield." "It's theft," I corrected, flipping the board to show the second document. "This is the recipient account, Lumina Aesthetics. And here is the lease agreement for a penthouse apartment in the city, paid for by that account." I looked at my mother. "Mom, meet Elise Vane. She's 24 years old. Mark has been using your retirement fund to pay for her rent, her car, and her jewelry for 2 years." My mother stared at the board. She looked at the numbers. She looked at the name. "No," she whispered. Mark said the market was down. He said the dividends were shrinking." "The market is up, Megan," Sarah said softly, stepping closer to my mother. "Mark is down. He's down $400,000 in gambling debts and bad trades. He stole from you to cover his tracks so Mr. Sterling wouldn't find out he was insolvent." Mark was shaking. He looked at his boss. "Sir, they're lying. It's Photoshop. It's a vendetta." Mr. Sterling looked at Mark with a professional, detached disgust. "Mark, I recognize that account number. You tried to route a client payment through there last week. Compliance flagged it, but you said it was a clerical error." Mark's face went from white to a sickly shade of gray. The house of cards wasn't just falling, it was disintegrating. "Dad," I said, turning to my father, who was clutching his chest, staring at his son. "Check your phone. I sent you the login details to the real account, not the dummy portal Mark built for you. Check the balance." My father, with trembling hands, pulled out his phone. The room was deadly silent. Everyone watched Simon's face. He tapped the screen. He squinted. And then he let out a sound I will never forget, a low, guttural moan of pure heartbreak. "It's gone," my father whispered. "It's all gone. 30 years, it's all gone." He looked up at Mark. The adoration that had been there for decades was gone, replaced by a horror so profound it looked like grief. "You stole it. You stole our future." "I was going to put it back," Mark screamed, the veneer completely gone now. He looked wild, unhinged. "I just needed time. If you hadn't," he pointed a shaking finger at me, "if you hadn't meddled, I would have fixed it. It's your fault. You jealous, petty little." "Enough." The word came from Sarah. She walked up to Mark. He towered over her, but she didn't flinch. She reached into her clutch, pulled out her wedding ring, and dropped it into his champagne glass. It made a sharp clink. "I'm filing for divorce, Mark, and I'm testifying for the prosecution." "Prosecution?" Mark laughed hysterically. "You think you can touch me?" "Mr. Henderson seems to think so," I said, stepping up beside Sarah. "The police are waiting in the lobby, Mark. We called them an hour ago. Embezzlement from a vulnerable senior is a felony. So is wire fraud." Mark looked at the door. He looked at his boss, who had turned his back on him. He looked at his parents, who were clinging to each other, weeping. He looked at me. "You planned this," he whispered. "You staged this." "I'm an event planner, Mark," I said, finally allowing myself a small, cold smile. "I specialize in execution." Security didn't have to drag us out. They had to drag Mark out. He went kicking and screaming, shouting threats, blaming everyone but himself, while the entire country club watched the golden child tarnish in real time. The fallout was swift, brutal, and thoroughly public. Because the confrontation happened in front of half the city's financial sector, Mark couldn't bury it. Mr. Sterling fired him the next morning for gross misconduct and breach of ethics. The investigation that followed uncovered a rabbit hole of fraud that went deeper than even I had realized. Mark hadn't just stolen from our parents, he had been skimming from 2 elderly clients at his firm. He wasn't just broke, he was going to prison. The weeks following New Year's were a blur of legal meetings. I sat in Arthur Henderson's office, flanked by Sarah and my parents. The dynamic in the room had shifted tectonically. My parents were no longer the imperious patriarch and matriarch. They were shrunken, aged by the betrayal. We managed to recover some of the assets. The forensic accountant found that Mark hadn't spent everything yet. He had stashed about 40% of the stolen funds in a crypto wallet that he eventually gave up in a plea deal to reduce his sentence. It wasn't everything, but it meant my parents wouldn't lose their house. Sarah moved into my spare room. It was supposed to be temporary, but we found that we worked well together. She was organized, creative, and resilient. By February, I had hired her as an assistant coordinator at my firm. She was thriving, her color returning, her laugh becoming genuine again. She was no longer Mark's wife. She was Sarah, and she was brilliant. The hardest part was the reconciliation with my parents. For a month, I kept our interactions strictly professional, limited to legal updates. I wasn't ready to forgive them for the things they said to me on Christmas, for the years of neglect, for the way they had enabled the monster Mark became. One rainy Tuesday in March, my mother came to my office. She didn't have an appointment. She stood in the reception area, looking at the photos of the events I had planned on the walls, the galas, the weddings, the corporate launches. "I never knew," she said softly when I walked out to meet her. "I never knew you did all this. I don't know what I thought." "You thought I planned birthday parties," I said, leaning against the doorframe. She turned to me. Her eyes were rimmed with red. "We were so wrong, Evelyn. We were so blinded by him. We let him treat you like dirt because it was easier than admitting he wasn't perfect. And when you tried to warn us, we 3 oughtn't to disown the only child who actually gave a damn about us." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, velvet box. It was her mother's sapphire brooch, a family heirloom she had always promised to Mark's first daughter. "I want you to have this," she said, her voice trembling. "I know it doesn't fix anything. I know we can't undo the years, but your father and I, we are so proud of you. You saved us. You saved Sarah. You were the strong one all along." I looked at the brooch, then at my mother. I didn't feel a magical wave of forgiveness wash away the past. The scars were still there, but the anger, the hot, burning rage that had fueled me through the holidays, had cooled into something manageable. "I'll take it," I said, taking the box. "But we have a lot of work to do, Mom. Trust takes a long time to rebuild." "I know," she nodded, wiping a tear. "We have time if you'll give it to us." Mark was sentenced in May. 5 years for wire fraud and embezzlement. Sarah and I didn't go to the sentencing. We didn't need to see him in handcuffs to know we had won. We were too busy. We were handling the coordination for the city's summer solstice festival. It was the biggest contract of my career. On the night of the festival, I stood on a balcony overlooking the city square. Thousands of people were dancing, music was thumping, and the lights were perfect. Sarah walked up beside me, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "To the future?" she asked, handing me a glass. I looked down at the crowd, then at my friend. I thought about the Christmas dinner, the humiliation, the fear, and then I thought about the look on Mark's face when the music stopped. "No," I smiled, clinking my glass against hers. "To the present, because right now, it's pretty damn good." I took a sip. It tasted like victory.